The Dawntrail finale is fast approaching, people. Final Fantasy XIV patch 7.3 is soon. It's on the horizon. It's like a pancake flip when you see the bubbles in the batter. And I think now's as good a time as any to sit back and talk about where we think the story is going to go from here. So let's do just that. Hello everyone, I am Jmulls, and let's talk about the end of the beginning. Dawntrail's an interesting story in a lot of ways. Not necessarily because of the story that it told, but because of the community reaction to it. So for those who don't know, 7.3 is supposed to be the finale of the Dawntrail story. Ordinarily, when it comes to a Final Fantasy XIV story, you have a big expansion with the 0.0 patch. An interesting beginning, middle, and an end. And then we get to the patches. Now, this wasn't the case in Endwalker, because Endwalker was unique. It was the end of the Hydaelyn and Zodiac arc. It was the end of that entire decade-long story. But Dawntrail is going back to the days of those other Final Fantasy XIV expansions, where it's the 0.3 patch that provides a full conclusion to the story that has been told in that expansion up to that point. And then 0.4 and 0.5 start to transition us away from that expansion and into the next. And with 7.3 coming out soon, that is supposedly what's happening here. The Dawntrail story itself will have its book fully closed, and we move on to prepare for 8.0. So there's a lot they can and maybe will do with 7.3. The stage is set. We have two main characters for this patch. At least that's what I'm picking up. At least from the build-up in 7.2. We have Sphene, who was brought back with 7.2, and we have Calyx, who is taking up the role of our antagonist. This is already a very different dynamic than what we had back in 7.0 and 7.1, which is when this story drew a lot of the ire from people because of the writing, the dialogue, and the characterization. See, the funny thing is, for me, I wasn't the biggest fan of 0.0 and 0.1 story, but I thought 0.1 started to move in the right direction. 7.2 just fully leaned into it, and I thought what they did with the character of Sphene was particularly engaging and interesting, and it hooked me right back in. And I don't think I'm the only person that feels like that either. I think there's been a noticeable increase in overall perceived quality for the storytelling in Final Fantasy XIV with the last patch, and if 7.3 is able to maintain that momentum, I think we can have Dawntrail end off on a really positive note overall. Not just for the story that we have just consumed or about to consume, but also for where this story can go from here. Now, this is where it gets rather interesting to me. I remember the build-up for Dawntrail and how they talked about how they can take this story in the future in different directions depending upon what people liked out of it. So there clearly wasn't a set-in-stone vision for the far-off future, like in the style of, say, the Hydaelyn and Zodiac arc or anything like that. Maybe there was some rough ideas, but I think the overall vibe was they wanted to see what stuck with Dawntrail and then lean into that direction. But not too long ago, we covered a Final Fantasy XIV interview where Yoshi P talked about they kind of have a rough idea where they want to go all the way through 10.0. That tells me there's now vision and there's now a direction they want to go. So in a lot of ways, I think we're seeing this patch in particular be a transitionary stage for Final Fantasy XIV story. I think Dawntrail is largely supposed to be a decently enough self-contained narrative. There will still be elements that are taken into the future and stuff like that, but Dawntrail itself, in a lot of ways, feels like, say, the expansion Dragonflight from World of Warcraft, where what is told there is kind of just self-contained, but there are narrative threads they sewed into the experience that they can pick up down the line. But right after we had Dragonflight, now we have the World Soul Saga, a 3-expansion trilogy of stories for World of Warcraft. I think we're getting something similar here with Final Fantasy XIV. Heck, a lot of the promotional material around 7.3 feels very conclusive, like a finale, because it is. The patch is called The Promise of Tomorrow. It's a very bright background in line with the overall aesthetic of Dawntrail. I think we're going to be wrapping up the storyline taking place in Tyrol and Alexandria, and what I don't think it's supposed to be is that the events here directly correspond to what's immediately following it up. I think there will be teasers. I think there'll probably even be a reveal as to where they want to go in the future. But what I think 7.3 is supposed to do is close the book on Dawntrail largely figuratively speaking. You can even read it here. Modified memories, neo-regulators, and rampaging soldiers. Recent events have given rise to uncertainty and confusion as a seemingly contagious fear of death erodes the joy from the faces of Alexandria's citizens. Desperate to preserve the former queen's beloved kingdom, the Warrior of Light rushes from one crisis to the next. I think the story is going to get dark, or at least comparatively dark to the rest of Dawntrail, and it's going to try to make it feel hopeless, and then end off with a very hopeful, happy-go-lucky tone to it. Where it's like, yeah, let's face the future, let's go into tomorrow, let's blaze the trail to the dawn. They'll probably do like a post-credit-esque scene at the very end, where it's like a meanwhile, or continuation with, say, the Warrior of Light, Sphene, and Y'shtola maybe, that's like setting the groundwork for where we're gonna go in 0.4.5 leading into 8.0. I think the biggest MacGuffin that will be important is the key to interdimensional travel. That little, like, holy grail thing, right? That'll be our biggest MacGuffin going into the future, and I imagine that thing will allow us to go shard hopping when they eventually go down that route. But I think one of the most important elements we're going to be getting out of Dawntrail in its entirety is Sphene. I think in a lot of ways, Final Fantasy XIV stumbled upon one of their better characters, and that is saying something, and I am not exaggerating here. I think Sphene has the potential to be one of the most well-received and beloved characters Final Fantasy XIV has ever really introduced. I thought her introduction in 7.2 was very strong. Her backstory is really interesting. She has a bunch of parallels and connections to Final Fantasy IX, but doesn't feel reliant upon them. And in a time when we needed a character to really like and want to travel alongside us in our adventures going into the future, when we needed that character the most, Sphene, like, fits that bill perfectly. When I initially finished patch 7.2's MSQ, I was immediately under the impression they wanted this character around for the long term. They had planned this character for a bit. They knew that after this expansion, they wanted Sphene alongside the Warrior of Light as new blood for adventures in the future. They built her up, they developed her quickly and efficiently, but also very well in my opinion, all the while utilizing previous iterations of Sphene and using the story that we had with 0.0 and 0.1 as a foundational framework to construct this new character from. If they are able to keep up this momentum, keep her as likable as she was in 0.2, in 0.3, continue to flesh her out, continue to build up that character, then I think we'll have that new traveling companion we needed to really mark the start of a new era for Final Fantasy XIV. The Scions are great, but we have largely done their stories. And I think with the way the writing is right now, the Scions feel just too safe and already explored, compared to when we had them in the previous expansions. But Sphene is different. She's fresh, she's new, and I think she's just what this game and the next storyline really needed. Dawntrail in a lot of ways for me is a tale of extremes, where I can go from being uninterested in a lot of the things that are actually happening back in 0.0 and 0.1. I always liked the character Sphene, even back in 0.0. I think what their plan is to develop this character, give her a little storyline in 0.2 and 0.3, so that she can be primed and in a ready position to follow us into the future. I think she's around for the long term, because it doesn't make sense to me to develop this character and to flesh her out so much, to add so much characterization and personality and likability into a character, just to have it there for like 2 patches max and then sideline her. She doesn't feel like Lise to me, she doesn't feel like Amarek. She feels like a character we are going to take into the future, long term. She feels like the Graha Tia for this expansion to me. Heck, in 0.2, we spent a good amount of time with Sphene struggling with the fact that she couldn't use her magic, but she wanted to contribute. In the fight with Totally Not Beatrix, she was pretty much raid leading us, because she was desperate to help in any way she could, even though she couldn't actually support us with magic directly. But in 0.3, they just show her with her book that they teased in 0.2. She'll probably go something akin to like a scholar or a summoner, probably some kind of hybrid of both just for trusts, so she can either heal or DPS. But we see her with the book in the promotional art for this patch. You can see it right here. And then also, if you scroll down, you can see the book is on a hip. You know, in 7.2, they talked about how Sphene doesn't view the people of Alexandria to be necessarily her people anymore, because they kind of aren't. But I imagine the takeaway will still be that she still loves her people, she wants to protect them, she wants to defend them. It's just, she's not their leader anymore. She's not their Queen Sphene. And we'll keep the Nepo baby in charge instead. What I wouldn't be particularly surprised about is if they do something along the lines of benching Sphene for whatever reason for 0.4 and 0.5. I don't kind of think they'll do this. I think she'll stick with us, but if they do go the route of, say, benching Sphene for 0.4 and 0.5 for whatever reason, I imagine we would just pick her back up when we got to 8.0, or like right near the end of 7.5 MSQ or something like that. If they do end up benching her, I don't think it would be long-term at anything. I just don't see this character as a short-term character. I don't think she's gonna go the route of, say, Yotsuyu or anything like that. She feels like a character they are trying to develop to take us into the future to represent this new era for the story. And I think that's a good direction to go in. However, can we say the same about Calyx? Let's talk Calyx, the new antagonist for this little arc 7.2 and 7.3. Now, he's the character that feels like he exists largely for this role of being that antagonist for 7.2 and 7.3 for Sphene, to give her a story so that she can get off the ground running into the future. But what is really, like, making me think, and I can't figure it out, is whether or not we're going to fully deal with Calyx in 0.3 or not. I feel as if that's the play, like this version of the endless Calyx we're going to largely deal with in 7.3. We have the dungeon, which I believe is structured to essentially give us the history of Calyx and how we got to this point with him as a character. I think the boss fight we will largely deal with him as well, but what I can't figure out is if they have any future plans for this character. They could, don't get me wrong, it's just I don't get overarching villain from this guy. That's not the vibe I get. I think I lean more on the side of he feels like he exists largely as an introductory villain for this Sphene right here, this new Sphene. We'll deal with Calyx and then we'll move into the future and whatever that has awaiting us. But when it comes to Calyx, like, they could do another Sphene with him, right? Where we dealt with the endless Sphene before, now we have the real Sphene. We could be dealing with the endless Calyx now, and perhaps he's also on ice like the original Sphene was. I kind of really doubt that because the role Sphene had in, like, living memory and all that, but, like, I don't think it's outside the realm of the possibilities that they could construct some kind of lore mechanism to have Calyx's actual body and consciousness locked away somewhere, and we could, like, unlock him here or, like, maybe in 0.4, something like that. Would they play that Sphene card again where it's like, okay, you dealt with the endless version that served as an antagonist, but the real one, when you awaken him, some way, somehow, well, they're actually a good guy. There was some prior dynamic between Sphene and Calyx, at least the real versions of them, not the endless ones, that Sphene alluded to at the beginning of 7.2 when they introduced Calyx, but we don't know the extent of how much they knew each other, at least I think. We know he was in charge of preservation, so I kind of doubt he would be a good guy right out the gate. Probably would take some convincing. I still think, though, that it feels more like out there than just the real one is dead and gone. He replaced himself with the endless version, which fits his character, which fits his story. They keep that up. They don't try to subvert it with a new plot reveal or anything. We deal with Calyx and we end that storyline, and then Sphene is able to move on into the future. I think that's the direction they're likely to go. That's the one I kind of hope they go for, but if they have an interesting story to tell, I'm willing to hear them out, whichever direction they go. I'm actually rather excited to find out what happens with Calyx as a villain, because I thought he was rather compelling in 7.2. He's kind of an archetype of villain we haven't really seen in Final Fantasy XIV all that much. Like, the closest we got was, like, maybe that storyline with Yotsuyu and her brother, or Fandaniel, you know, like that guy. Like, that feels like the closest we've gotten to this archetype of the cold, calculating mad scientist that Final Fantasy is kind of known for, largely thanks to Hojo, but it's interesting to see a Final Fantasy XIV spin on this type of villain. I still think they want to go for more of a sense of finality with Dawntrail with 7.3. They want to have it end off on an uplifting, hopeful note. So I think we will largely deal with Calyx. Whether or not we just straight up kill him or, like, imprison him, despite the fact he's an endless, or, like, we somehow redeem him, I'm still not entirely sold on the idea that that's going to be the route they go, but I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility either. I think, personally speaking, as of this point in time, I'm more in the camp of I would like us to just straight up defeat him, deal with him as a character, and we can move on in the future, Sphene in tow, to deal with whatever this new big story arc they want to do entails. That's the direction that I'm hoping for as of this point in time, but again, depending upon the way they tell any of these storylines, I'm willing to go in with an open mind and hear them out. I think Final Fantasy XIV 7.2 did a lot of good, and I really hope to see a lot of those trends continue with 7.3, at least when it comes to the main story. I think for a lot of people, they didn't enjoy Dawntrail because it was in the moment, because there was nothing more to look forward to. But down the line, I could imagine, so long as the story continues to get better and better, people would soften on Dawntrail overall because, well, they know, or at least believe, that it does get better. There is more to consume, there's more to enjoy. Point 3 has the potential to make the best out of a bad situation. The story seemingly is going to have interesting characters, interesting themes, and interesting plot devices to take into the future to tell a new story. Sphene is great, Calyx is interesting, the key to interdimensional travel has limitless possibilities. We can go to Meracidia, we can go to other places around Hydaelyn, or Aetheris if you want to call that. We can go to any number of shards. There's a lot of good and a lot of potential Final Fantasy XIV has right now, and I think it's important to talk about that just as much as we talk about any other things we like or dislike. So leave a comment down below with your thoughts, your opinions on how the main story is shaping up for 7.3. You looking forward to it? You still a bit hesitant? What could they do to really pull you back in? And if you're already pulled in, where do you hope to see this story go in the future? Love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and hear your perspectives. While you're down there, please leave a like and subscribe. Follow me on TikTok, Twitch, and Twitter, Jmulls G. I have a Discord in the description down below. And Final Fantasy XIV is dropping Windows 10 support. But honestly, in my opinion, you should be putting the blame more on Microsoft. If you want to find out more, check out this video right here. Stay safe, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again!